a silent ranch, a stepson's forbidden gaze. When summer heat ignites a dangerous spark, Anna must choose family loyalty or risking it all. Will their secret burn or fade? Hit like and subscribe to watch the fire unfold. That summer, the ranch was unnervingly still. It was a silence that made every little noise stand out more. The creak of a barn door swaying in the wind, the crunch of gravel beneath boots, and the distant hum of cicadas. Anna had spent many years here, long before her life grew more complicated, before she became a wife and a stepmother. The land had always kept her grounded. The routine of daily chores and sunsets anchored her in a way that nothing else could. She thought she had come to terms with how life could shift in the blink of an eye. Then Sean returned. Sean was the son of her husband, but he wasn't much like him. He was quieter, more observant, someone who seemed to see beyond the surface of things. After leaving for college, he had stayed in the city for work. Anna remembered him as a tall, silent teenager, still grappling with whatever bitterness he held over his father's remarriage. But when he came back that summer, something had changed. It wasn't just that he had grown up. It was the confidence he now carried, self-assured, yet not arrogant. He still didn't say much, but when he did, his deep voice seemed to hang in the air, drawing attention without effort. And his gaze, steady and deliberate, made Anna feel as though he was trying to understand her. She tried not to let it affect her. After all, she was married and Sean was her stepson. But the way he hung around the barn while she worked, offering to help with this and that, stirred feelings in her that she hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, they were working on a fence at the property's edge. It was one of those scorching hot days where the sun felt like it was melting everything it touched. Anna had tied her blonde hair in a messy braid, sweat dripping down her face as she struggled with a stubborn post. Sean was on the other side of the fence, his dark skin shimmering under the sun as he hammered nails into the wood. Anna caught herself staring, her eyes tracing the muscles in his arms, admiring the effortless strength he displayed. When he looked up and met her gaze, she quickly looked away, her face flushed. "You okay?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Yeah, just hot," she responded, avoiding his eyes. He handed her a water bottle, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled her hand back too quickly, nearly dropping the bottle. Sean chuckled softly, a sound that was both teasing and oddly intimate. "Careful now," he said, his eyes lingering on her for just a second too long. Anna tried to dismiss it, focusing on the task at hand, but the tension between them was undeniable, like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. She told herself it was nothing more than her imagination running wild, but deep down she knew it wasn't, and that scared her. Later that evening, as Anna stood at the sink washing dishes, her mind kept drifting to the way Sean had looked at her and the spark of attraction that had shot through her body. She glanced out the window, watching as the last of the sun dipped below the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Sean was somewhere outside, probably in the barn or sitting on the porch. The thought of him so close sent a shiver down her spine. When her husband entered the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her waist, Anna stiffened. "You okay, Anna?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Yeah," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But it wasn't fatigue that kept her awake that night. Staring at the ceiling as the house grew quiet, it was the way her heart raced whenever Sean was near, how her mind replayed those charged moments that felt far from innocent. And it was the growing realization that she was standing at the edge of something she might not be able to walk away from. The days that followed tested Anna's resolve. She threw herself into the ranch routine, hoping the physical work would drown out the thoughts she refused to acknowledge. But Sean was everywhere, helping with the cattle, fixing the tractor, even offering to run errands into town. It wasn't that he was doing anything inappropriate. In fact, he was the perfect blend of respectful and competent. And maybe that made it worse. Anna found herself hyper-aware of him. His laugh when he joked with the ranch hands, the way he leaned against the barn door in the afternoons, a subtle smirk playing on his lips like he knew something unspoken. Every look he sent her way seemed intentional, as if he were testing the boundaries she was trying so hard to maintain. She hated herself for noticing, but she couldn't help it. One evening, after her husband had left for a meeting in town, Anna found herself alone in the kitchen. She was scrubbing the counters, almost with frantic energy, trying to stay busy when she heard the screen door creak open behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Sean. His presence shifted the air in the room, impossible to ignore. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice calm and low. "No," she said quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she rinsed the sponge. "I'm almost done." But he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching her with his steady, unblinking gaze. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Anna felt her pulse quicken, her heart pounding as though it were warning her. "You've been avoiding me," Sean finally said, his tone neutral, but his words cutting straight through her defenses. "I haven't," she started, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't buying it, and deep down, she knew he was right. "Look," she said, turning to face him. She tried to keep her voice even, but it wavered under the weight of her own guilt. Whatever this is, it can't happen. It's not right." Sean didn't move. His eyes remained locked on hers. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment vanished, replaced by the unreadable expression she was starting to recognize as his shield. "I know," he murmured softly. "I'm not trying to mess things up for you." His words should have offered reassurance, yet they didn't. There was something in the way he spoke, something that felt too close, too intimate. She wanted to tell him to leave, to create some space between them before they crossed a line that could never be undone. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she stood frozen as Sean moved a step closer. He wasn't touching her, still a good foot apart, but the distance felt charged, as if a storm was on the brink of breaking. Anna's breath caught in her chest, her body betraying her again as she felt that same electric pull, stronger than ever. "Sean," she whispered, her voice nearly inaudible. "I'm not doing anything," he said, a faint smile forming on his lips. It wasn't cocky or smug, but gentle, almost teasing, yet it still sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm just standing here." But the way he said it, the way his gaze never left hers, made it clear that they were both on the edge of something dangerous. Anna's mind screamed at her to stop this, to walk away, but her feet remained rooted to the floor. She felt like she was drowning, caught in a current she didn't know how to fight. Then, just as quickly as the tension had built, Sean stepped back. The spell was broken, and Anna felt air rush back into her lungs, as if she'd been holding her breath. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, his voice calm and steady, as if nothing had transpired. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Anna standing there, her hands trembling and her heart pounding. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind. The way his voice had enveloped her. The way his presence filled the room like an inescapable shadow. She hated herself for how much she had wanted him to stay, for the part of her that had almost leaned into the storm instead of fleeing from it. The following days passed in a blur, each moment more unbearable than the last. Anna did her best to avoid Sean, her stomach twisting every time she saw him across the field or heard his voice drifting from the barn. She threw herself into work with a desperate energy, hoping physical exhaustion would numb the gnawing ache in her chest. But it didn't. The worst part was how little Sean seemed affected. If he felt the same tension, the same undeniable pull, he didn't show it. He remained polite, helpful, and infuriatingly calm, as if that moment in the kitchen had never happened. But every time their eyes met, it was there, the unspoken truth neither of them could deny. It felt like a game they were both playing, each waiting to see who would break first. Then, one night, it happened. The house was quiet. Her husband was still away on a business trip, and the ranch hands had all retired for the night. Anna was in the barn, finishing up some late chores she'd invented just to stay busy. The horses stirred restlessly in their stalls, and a summer storm was brewing outside, the air thick with the scent of rain. She didn't hear him come in. She only realized she wasn't alone when she turned and found Sean standing in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the dim light of the barn. Her heart leapt into her throat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You're working late," he said, his voice steady and low. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, her words sharp as she turned back to the saddle she was cleaning. She focused on the task with frantic energy, scrubbing the worn leather as if her life depended on it. Sean didn't move. He just stood there, watching her with that steady, unwavering gaze. The weight of his presence pressed down on her like a physical force. She could feel him, the heat of him filling the barn, making it impossible to think clearly. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, echoing the words he'd spoken days earlier. This time there was no amusement in his voice, just quiet certainty. "I'm not," she started, but her voice faltered. She couldn't lie to him, not when the truth was written all over her face. I don't know what you want from me, Sean." He took a step closer, the soft crunch of his boots on the straw-covered floor barely audible. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I just can't stop thinking about you." Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. The barn felt as if it were closing in around them, the storm outside rumbling louder. She turned to face him, her hands trembling at her sides. "You can't say things like that," she whispered. "You can't." "Why not?" he interrupted, his voice sharper now, tinged with frustration. "Why can't I? It's the truth, Anna, and you feel it too." Her mind spun, her body vibrating with a mix of fear and desire. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come because he wasn't wrong. She did feel it. She felt it every time he looked at her, every time his voice sent shivers through her. "This has to stop," she said, her voice breaking. "We can't." But Sean wasn't listening. He took another step toward her, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating off him, until she could see the way his dark eyes burned with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice rough and low. "Look me in the eye and tell me you don't." Anna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. Her body trembled, struggling to hold itself together. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, teetering on the edge of something she couldn't control. "Sean, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this." For a moment, she thought he might actually listen. His jaw was clenched, and his hands balled into fists at his sides as he seemed to battle some internal struggle she couldn't understand. But just as quickly, he took a step back. The tension snapped like a taut rubber band, leaving the air between them thick with an electric charge. Sean ran a hand through his hair, his breath uneven as he looked at her, his face filled with frustration and something else. Something softer, almost caring. "I'm sorry," he murmured finally, his voice little more than a whisper. "I didn't mean to." But before he could finish, a loud crack of thunder shook the barn, making both of them flinch. The moment shattered, and Anna seized the opportunity to put space between them. She brushed past him, her heart pounding as she hurried into the night. The rain had started, cool droplets soaking her skin as she stumbled toward the house. She didn't look back, didn't dare risk seeing the expression on Sean's face. All she knew was that she had to get away, to put as much distance between them as she could before she did something irreversible. When she reached the porch, the storm erupted above her, lightning splitting the sky in brilliant flashes. She paused, chest rising and falling rapidly, her gaze fixed on the darkened horizon. She thought of Sean standing alone in the barn, and a feeling she couldn't quite identify washed over her. Regret, maybe, or relief, or perhaps a mix of both. But as the rain poured down around her, she realized one thing with painful clarity. I never expected to hire a male nanny, but after weeks of juggling work, the kids, and a household always on the edge of chaos, I finally gave in. Andrew came highly recommended. A friend of mine had worked with him and assured me he was great with kids and completely trustworthy. When he showed up for the interview, I was taken aback. I had anticipated someone older, more like the stereotypical grandpa-type babysitter seen in movies. Instead, Andrew was in his late 20s, tall, with an easy smile that immediately put the kids at ease. He got the job, partly out of desperation and partly because I could see how much the kids adored him. He didn't just watch over them. He played with them, made them laugh, and somehow got them to eat their vegetables without a single complaint. My husband Greg was often away for work, and Andrew filled a gap in our lives I hadn't even realized existed. It started innocently. Small chats in the kitchen while he packed snacks for the kids, quick laughs over my youngest Ella's hilarious antics, especially when she started calling him Andy. At first, I didn't notice how much I looked forward to those moments alone with him. He had a way of genuinely listening when I spoke, something Greg didn't always do. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Andrew stayed longer to help clean up after Ella's birthday party. The house was quiet, rare for us with 3 young kids. I handed him a glass of lemonade and we sat at the kitchen table chatting about trivial things. "You're amazing with them," I said, nodding toward the stairs where the kids were sleeping. "I don't know how you do it." He smiled shyly. "They make it easy. You've raised great kids." The compliment warmed me, but I quickly dismissed it as simple politeness. Nothing more. Or at least that's what I told myself. But later that night, as I lay in bed with Greg's soft snores filling the silence, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Andrew had looked at me when he said those words. The next day, things felt subtly different. Externally, Andrew was still the same professional, and I kept things light, focusing on my work and the kids. Yet, there was an undeniable shift, an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. I became hyper-aware of his presence. It wasn't just me. At least I didn't think it was. There were moments when our eyes would meet across the room, lingering just a little too long, or when his hand brushed mine as he passed me the baby's bottle. These small, fleeting touches shouldn't have mattered, but they did. To me, at least. One afternoon, while sorting laundry in the living room, Andrew came in from the backyard where he'd been playing with the kids. He stood there, wiping sweat from his forehead, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. His t-shirt clung to his chest, damp from the heat, and I felt ridiculous for noticing. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. "No, I'm good," I said quickly, my cheeks burning as I focused on the pile of socks in front of me. But as he turned to leave, I caught him glancing back at me. Just for a second. It seemed insignificant, but maybe it wasn't. After that glance, everything changed, though not in any overt way. Andrew was still Andrew, and I was still trying to be the busy, reliable mom. Yet the tension was undeniable. It was unspoken and clearly unplanned, but it lingered in the moments when we crossed paths. The day after our quiet conversation in the living room, the weather was unusually warm for the season. The kids begged to go to the park, and Andrew offered to take them. Initially, I stayed back, intending to catch up on work, but something pulled me outside. I threw on a light jacket and followed them. When I arrived, the kids were playing wildly on the playground, their laughter ringing through the cool afternoon air. Andrew stood nearby, watching them with a small, content smile. I walked over and he turned at the sound of my footsteps. "Decided to join us?" he asked, his voice light, though his eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than necessary. "I figured I could use the fresh air," I replied, trying to sound casual as I looked out at the kids. Eventually, we ended up sitting on a bench slightly away from the playground, still able to see the children but with some space between us. The conversation started easily, about the kids, the weather, small talk. But then he turned to me, that steady, thoughtful look in his eyes. "You've been quiet today," he observed. "I've just had a lot on my mind," I answered. I responded, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. He nodded, leaning back against the bench. "Anything you'd like to talk about?" For a moment, I thought about opening up, sharing the burden that was growing heavier each day. The struggle of balancing work, motherhood, and a marriage that seemed more like a business arrangement than anything else. But then I stopped myself. He wasn't the right person to confide in, even though it felt so easy to talk to him. "I'm fine," I said instead, offering him a small smile. He didn't push, but the silence that followed didn't feel awkward. If anything, it seemed like he understood, even without me speaking a word. Soon, the kids rushed over, out of breath and flushed, asking for snacks. Andrew stood up, pulled a water bottle from his bag, and handed it to Ella. "Here you go, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. As I watched him interact with them, I felt that familiar warmth inside me. He was so good with them. Patient, kind, and attentive in a way that made me both grateful and oddly envious. When the kids wandered back to the playground, Andrew turned back to me. "You're an incredible mom, you know that?" I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "I don't always feel that way." "You are," he said firmly. "The way you manage everything, it's impressive." His words took me by surprise, and for a moment I was at a loss for what to say. I looked away, focusing on the trees gently swaying in the breeze, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Thank you," I replied finally, my voice softer than I intended. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, but as we walked back toward the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed again. The tension was still there, unspoken but unmistakable. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, I went outside to sit on the porch. The air had grown cool, and the distant sound of crickets filled the stillness. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, closed my eyes, and let the calmness wash over me. I didn't hear Andrew approach until he spoke. "Mind if I join you?" I opened my eyes, startled, but nodded. He sat on the step below me, leaning back against the railing. "It's peaceful out here," he said, glancing up at the sky. "It is," I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. We sat in silence for a while, the space between us feeling both too close and too far. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I hope I'm not overstepping," he said, "but you seem like you could use a break from everything." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the concern in his eyes. He wasn't just being polite. He genuinely cared. "Maybe," I said finally, my voice wavering slightly. "But life doesn't really give breaks, does it?" He gave a faint smile, turning his gaze back to the yard. "No, I guess it doesn't." For a moment, the air between us seemed charged, like a thread tightening. I felt it in the way he shifted a little closer, his shoulder brushing against the blanket around me. But just as quickly he stood, breaking the tension. "I should probably head in," he said, his voice returning to its usual casual tone. I nodded, clutching the blanket more tightly around me. "Good night, Andrew." "Good night," he replied, his gaze lingering on me for just a second longer before he disappeared into the house. As I sat there alone under the stars, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. It was a mix of relief and something else I wasn't ready to name. The next few days passed in a blur of avoidance and stolen glances. I tried to keep myself busy with chores, errands, and the kids' never-ending energy, but it was impossible to ignore the way Andrew's presence filled every room he entered. He was careful, respectful, and professional, but the atmosphere around us felt electric, as though something was waiting to spark. Then came the evening that changed everything. Greg had called to say he wouldn't be home until late again, and the kids were already asleep upstairs. I was outside in the backyard, tidying up after dinner, when Andrew stepped out of the house. He was holding 2 mugs of tea, his figure outlined by the soft light spilling from the kitchen. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "Thanks," I murmured, taking it from him. My fingers brushed his, and the brief contact sent a jolt through me. He sat down on the edge of the patio, and I joined him. The cool night air wrapped around us. We didn't speak at first, sipping our tea in silence, but the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt heavy with unspoken words. After a while, he broke the silence. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low but steady. I glanced at him, my heart pounding. "I've just had a lot on my mind." "Is it me?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine. There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet vulnerability that made it hard to look away. I hesitated, gripping the mug tighter. "It's not you, it's me. This situation." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I get it. I really do. I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," I said quickly, and he looked up again, his expression searching. The words hung between us, unspoken but understood. I knew I should stand up, walk back inside, and end whatever this was. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed, and when he shifted slightly closer, I didn't move away. His knee brushed mine, and the contact sent a wave of warmth through me. "I don't want to overstep," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the crickets. "You haven't," I whispered, even though I knew we were dangerously close to crossing a line we couldn't uncross. He reached up, hesitating for a moment before brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was so gentle, so intentional that it felt like the world had stopped spinning for a heartbeat. We just stared at each other, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. I could feel his breath warm and shaky, and my own heart pounding in my chest. Then the sound of a car door slamming in the distance shattered the moment. We both jumped, pulling away as if the spell had been broken. I began to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. Andrew stood there, running a hand through his hair. I should go, he said, his voice strained. I nodded, gripping the mug in my hands as if it might help ground me. Good night, Andrew. Good night, he replied, his gaze lingering on mine for a fleeting moment before he turned and disappeared into the house. I remained outside long after he left, gazing up at the stars, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Relief, regret, yearning, all tangled together in a way that left me gasping for air. When I finally entered, the house was still. Andrew had already gone, and the kids were sound asleep. I climbed the stairs to my room, closing the door gently behind me. As I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying how he had looked at me, how he had come so close yet never quite bridged the gap between us. It would have been so simple to let it happen, to fall into something that felt both terrifying and inevitable, but it hadn't. And that was the thing about near misses. They stayed with you, haunted you, and whispered of what could have been. The next morning, when Andrew arrived, everything seemed like it was back to normal. He greeted the kids with his usual warmth, and we exchanged little more than a few polite words. But when our eyes met briefly across the kitchen, I saw it. An unspoken understanding, a shared memory of a moment that had almost changed everything. And then, just like that, he looked away. And I did the same. Because some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed.